Chapter 5. The birch owl was sailing silently through the trees of feldspar forest when it spotted the travelers. It alighted on a branch and watched them pass by below before taking off, flying with speed to the village. There it glided into the dwelling place, where a burst of light filled the small chamber, and Mulungar arose, now back in his body. He touched the head of the owl, which opened its eyes, blinked in confusion, then flew off into the night. Mulungar hurried down the steps, saying nothing to the watcher at the bottom, and ran to his weaving. Inside, Luthnoel and Bellarania sat at the table, not yet retired for the evening. Paul returns, riding Sunset. He is not alone. Another human accompanies him. Luthnoel grabbed her bow and quiver of arrows, and the family rushed to the village entrance to meet them. The horse carried her 2 riders down the hill to the village. She was tired, having done more running than she had ever done, let alone with an extra passenger on her back. She looked forward to rest, and hopefully an apple treat from her black-maned elf. She had some concern that the firstborn sister would be upset, not understanding why she didn't return when the second-born was taken, like her cowardly cousin Phantom had when the owl descended. She didn't really understand it herself. When her white-maned elf had returned from the other place with the strange one, and they put it on her back, she immediately sensed a vulnerability in it, like a babe just born, unable to rise on its legs. Then, when her elf was snatched by the owl, and she was alone with it, she felt its fear and weakness pouring forth. She could see its tether stretching into the other place, and knowing they had meant to reach the old one, she decided to help it. She could not leave it to its fate in the forest, even when commanded to by the big elf. Thank the 6 she did, as it would not have survived otherwise. She almost feared it hadn't when it fell from her back. Then when it vanished into the other place, she was surprised, but relieved. She was about to turn and leave for the village when the tether reappeared. Weak at first, but then it quickly grew stronger. She understood then what tied him to the other place had been severed, and he was now being pulled by another. This one was woven not of love of place, but love of another, love for her white-maned elf. She knew then that he would return, so she stayed. Now she brings not 1 but 2 from the other place to the village. There, waiting at the entrance, stood her elf family. The entrance to Chines was marked by 2 large trees on either side of the road, each reflecting the other in form. At their base they arc outwards, then swoop back in at their tops, creating a circular arch for those to pass under. In its branches are flowers that open only at night, offering their nectar to the glowflies that in turn collect and spread their pollen. The effect of this archway, crowned with dancing green lights illuminating purple blossoms, is normally a welcome sight to weary night travelers, but for Paul his focus was on the 3 elves that stood beneath it, who looked anything but welcoming. "Get off of Sunset," Luthnoel commanded. "What did she say?" asked Richard, still clutching Paul's waist. "She asked us to get off the horse," Paul whispered. "Gladly. My ass is killing me." The 2 dismounted, and when they did, Luthnoel took an arrow from the quiver on her back and placed it on her bow. She did not draw it, but held it at the ready, pointing toward the ground. "We heard from Calarian that you had fled to other place with your tail between your legs. You did this though my daughter had been captured, you who she had befriended and trusted. Why now do you return, and why do you dare to bring another human with you?" "What is she saying now? She seems mad," Richard said, looking out from behind him. Paul shushed him and answered, Eltherea is the reason I've returned. Please forgive me for my cowardice. I've come back to help free her in any way I can. I would give my life to do so." He then turned, putting his arm around Richard, saying, "This is my friend Richard, who risked much to come here. He knows Eltherea. He wants to help as well." "What are you saying about me?" Paul ignored Richard and waited for a response. It was Bellarania who spoke next. Calarian said Sunset stood by you. Did she bring you to the island? I never made it there. I collapsed from her back and awoke another place. Once there, I met Richard, and we went to the loon who helped me come back to Taloth. I found Sunset waiting for me when I returned. I don't know why, but she has saved my life many times over. Bellarania put her hand over her mother's, who took the arrow off the bow and replaced it in the quiver. I do not trust my sister's judgment, especially when it comes to her lovers, she said, but I trust our horse. She must feel you worthy of her protection. Sunset brought you back here for a reason, though I do not understand it myself. If you truly wish to assist us, we set out tomorrow for Triathale. You and your friend can stay in our weaveling tonight. We will discuss plans in the morning, said Malungar, who turned and walked through the arch, the others following suit. So what's happening? Richard asked. Tonight we sleep in their house. Then tomorrow we go to rescue Ellie, Paul said, barely able to contain his excitement. We? All right, well, I guess I go where you go. Right now, I just want to lay down. My entire body is yelling at me. I don't suppose they have Tylenol here. Paul shook his head no, and the two walked stiffly behind the others. Sunset left them to graze and rest, knowing tomorrow another journey lay in store. Once in the weaveling, Bellarania brought them to Eltheria's room. Richard took a look at the bed and said, They don't have a couch I can crash on? While Paul did not love the arrangement, it was the only option, so he was going to do his best to sleep. To that end, he asked Bellarania if she had any of her sleeping medicine, and possibly something for her general aches and pains. She responded she should have something back in her room that would help with both. What are you guys saying now? Richard asked. Tired of having to translate, Paul looked at Bellarania and, fearful of her response, did his best to make it seem a logical request. Bellarania, you have done so much for us already, and I don't wish to burden you further, but as Richard will be traveling with us tomorrow in our journey to save Eltherea, you want me to gift him our language. Very well. She grabbed Richard's hand and performed the magic while he looked on, mystified. When she had finished, she promptly left to get whatever vials she needed from her room. Richard sat staring at his palm before wiping the spit off on his shirt. Not that I'm complaining about whatever the hell that was, but what the hell was that? It was a spell. Soon you will transform into a toad. How are you feeling? You jest. Why would she do that? And why would you allow her? Richard said, visibly panicked. Calm yourself, Richard. Yes, I am fooling about the toad, but do you notice nothing different? The realization hit him then. You are speaking Elvish, and I am understanding you. Oh, I am speaking it right now. This is so very strange. When Bellarania returned, Richard introduced himself and thanked her for giving him her language, saying it was wondrous, which was the closest thing to cool he could think in Elvish. She nodded politely and gave them 2 small glass tinctures, instructing them to drink when they were in bed, ready for sleep, and not a moment sooner. As she turned to leave, Paul asked, Before, when you spoke of your sister, you called me her lover. Was that the word she used for me, or... As I said, drink that no sooner than when you are ready for sleep. Good night. She was nearly out of the room when she turned to say, Oh, since Eltherea isn't here, you will be without a door tonight. Richard watched her leave and said to Paul in English, She is so beautiful. The whole family is beautiful. Is the entire village like that? I don't know. I guess so. It's like a town of supermodels. Are there trolls in this world? I think I'd feel more comfortable with them. No trolls that I know of, but come on, you're a handsome guy, Paul said awkwardly. Well, don't know about you, but I'm ready for some shut-eye. Right, yeah, time to saw some logs. They climbed into bed, thankful that the open door excused any notion of undressing, drank their medicine, and barely had a chance to set down the vials before they were unconscious. He was falling again. Then he was sinking. From out of the murky waters a glowing figure floated into view. It was Ellie. She pulled him to her and embraced him, her arms wrapping around him. He went to kiss her and watched in horror as her face sprouted leaves till eventually that's all he could see. He continued to sink, her arms crushing him now. A face revealed itself through the leaves, but it wasn't Ellie's. It smiled a large, toothy, reptilian grin. Paul awoke with Richard's arm hugging him. "Richard, wake up." "What? Oh, sorry," he said, releasing him. "I was afraid I might do that. I got pretty used to spooning Beth." "Don't worry about it," Paul said, unfamiliar with the term and hoping it wasn't sexual in nature. "You are finally awake." It was Bellarania standing in the doorway. "Here," she said, throwing some material at them. "You cannot travel to Triathale looking like that. Cover yourself with these cloaks. Hurry and eat. We are waiting down below." "I thought we were to spend time planning this morning," Paul said. "Plans have already been made," she said. "But I thought, be thankful that you have even been considered to join us in this." Then she added more gently, "I know you wish to help her, Paul. It did not make sense to the others, allowing you and the stranger to come. I told them that the loon, in her wisdom, gave you both entrance to Tulath, and that we don't know what part any of us might play as this unfolds. They agreed to let you ride with us. You can expect no more from them. The opportunity to prove yourself to everyone will come soon enough, I fear." With that, she left. Paul and Richard put on their cloaks, Richard's going nearly to the floor while Paul's stopped at his shins, his red high tops on full display. They ate quickly and hurried down the spiral steps, the morning fog growing denser as they descended. There, illuminated by shafts of sunlight stabbing through the mist, awaited the group. 5 elves, all atop horses, with a riderless Sunset and Phantom, all watched them approach. Along with Ellie's sister, mother, and father was Calarian and Aritha, the elf who had stopped him from going up to the dwelling place. Paul recalled as not seeming too friendly towards Ellie either. Paul looked up at Bellarania and asked, "You are not riding Sunset?" "I thought it best given the bond you share. Paul's friend, we have given your horse a saddle, as is custom for our children when they first learn to ride." "Thanks," Richard said, not sure if he should be offended, but was still glad for it. Luthnoel addressed the company. "We shall start on the main road, moving swiftly as we can, but will soon leave it for the shelter of the woods, where traveling will be slower. We will set up camp outside of Triathale tonight." Looking pointedly at Paul and Richard, she added, "If you fall behind, we will not wait for you." She clicked her tongue, and her horse took off, with the others following. 7 horses galloped through the tree archway with 5 elves riding confidently on their backs, and 2 humans holding on for dear life. Eltherea looked out the arrow slit onto the landscape below. The narrow gap in the wall was the only source of sunlight in the room where she was being held, and she gazed beyond the fortress wall with only one thought: escape. She knew it was an unlikely thing. The stone structure was built high upon a bluff that bordered a lake, and the outside wall of her room nearly merged with the rock face below, making it 3 times higher than any of the weavelings in Chinese. The only entrance was a heavy wooden door reinforced with wrought iron, with a guard stationed outside of it. All that, coupled with the injuries she suffered from her capture, gave her little hope of breaking out. In her despair and anger, she grabbed a chair and threw it across the room, which aggravated the puncture wounds in her shoulders, causing her to cry out. Just then the door opened, and in stepped Raneth, followed by 2 elves clad in armor, with swords at their sides. "Eltherea, you should be resting," said Raneth, approaching her but stopping at a safe distance. "The healer said it was the best thing for someone in your condition. Throwing a tantrum like a child will only serve to worsen it." Eltherea said nothing and returned to look out the thin window, her back to him. "Food will also help, yet Bordelire says you haven't touched anything we've offered." "Bordelire? Is that the name of my jailer standing outside the door?" "Please, you are my guest here. This is no prison cell," he said plaintively. "I was brought here by force and am being kept in a room locked from the outside where a guard keeps watch. If I am a guest, I would hate to see how your prisoners are treated." It is for your own protection, Eltherea. No, those two carrying swords are the only protection I see, but it is only for you. Why don't you speak with me alone? What do you fear? You certainly faced Levi alone. Yes, I killed him. I admit it freely now, and to all. Can you not see I did it for you? For what he did to you? Tried to do. He was no threat to me. He should have been cast out, as is our way. She turned then to face him. Perhaps I could have forgiven you for that, as a moment of righteous anger. But I find your treatment of our fellow elves far more alarming. It makes no sense. That again? I explain this. Levi was wrong for what he did to you, but his words about our ways ring true. Just look to the animals. Their coats are all similar, and they are stronger for it. Any outlier is treated as a threat to the safety of all and as outcast. That is a madman's ravings. Horses come as varied as elves in appearance, and anyone knows the healthiest forest contains the most varied kinds of trees. You killed Levi, but his evil human words killed any sense you may have had. Raneth looked at her angrily. Eltherea thought he was about to strike her, but instead he put his hand to her cheek and stroked it, saying, You loved me once. I know you will again. You and I can be as king and queen, ruling over all the land as far as you can see from this fortress I have remade. She grabbed his hand and pushed it away. My love for you is as cold and dead as the stone of this place, and I have no desire to rule anything save myself. He sighed and smiled at her. You just need time to consider your situation. I will leave you to it, he said, motioning to his guards and turning to go. Raneth, she said, and he turned to regard her. If I am truly a guest, then I ask for a better meal than the swill you've placed in front of me. Anything you desire, my sweet. I request bread and cheese and grapes. I will see to it myself. He bowed and exited. The door closed, and the sound of the latch being locked echoed through her room. They were the first person I ever heard of that didn't go by she or he, which I found fascinating. Well, regardless, I started listening to their music because I knew the Melvins were influenced by them. Paul overheard Richard talking to Calarian and thought he should rescue them, so he brought Sunset closer as they trotted through the trees. Richard, are you disturbing Calarian with other place talk? It is no bother, human. I find him amusing. I was just telling them about Throbbing Gristle's singer, Paul. I bet Ellie would be familiar. I went down a rabbit hole about them. Well, truthfully, I just read their Wikipedia. That's a kind of book with everything you can think of in it, he said to Calarian. What was I saying? Oh, yes. I listened to them because of the Melvins, and I listened to the Melvins because they were considered the ancestors of, well, there's no word in your language for grunge, and they were a large influence on Nirvana. Nirvana means, well, I suppose the closest Elvish word is paradise. I don't know what a Melvin is. Calarian laughed. Do you see what I mean? I know he is speaking my tongue, yet his words are nonsense. Richard seemed pleased to be making Calarian laugh, despite it being at his expense. You would like their music, I think. Nirvana, I mean. Your hair even resembles Kurt's. Tragic what befell him, of course. Calarian stopped their horse and put a finger to their lips. The company all stood by quietly, only hearing the wind rustling the surrounding leaves. Then Calarian pointed, and in the direction they indicated appeared a lone wolf. When it saw the group, it stood still for a moment, then turned and bounded away. Was it a spy from Triathale? Paul asked Calarian quietly. Hopefully not, though there is no way to be sure. It is best we continue on without speaking. The day grows dim, and our destination draws near. Paul looked at Richard to make sure he understood, and Richard gave him an exasperated look while mouthing the word "okay" at him. He's grown as a person, thought Paul, but in many ways he is still that young man I met mere days ago. Will I be the same way when I'm older? Wiser, but still carrying this version of myself along? He pondered this as they moved through the dark woods, where the sun seldom broke through the leaves above. They made camp as close to the forest's edge as they dared. The elves took it in shifts to keep watch. The humans were naturally not trusted with this task. Paul didn't mind. He just wanted to sleep. He felt an odd calm, his mind more at peace than it had been since he could remember. His return to Tuloth had eased his burdened conscience, and he felt a clarity of purpose now that he was here. Sleep came easily that night. The next morning he woke to find the others gathered around something which turned out to be Luthnoel and Bellarania, lying on the forest floor, peacefully sleeping. Richard saw Paul approach and came up, wishing him a "Good morning, sleepyhead," in English. Paul asked what was happening. "They both did that switcheroo thing. One's a bird, one's a mouse. They're scoping out the fortress. Paul, it was amazing. Bellarania was able to catch the mouse, and she put it to sleep, and... oh, they're coming back." A large hawk flew into their midst, landing next to the two sleeping elves. It gently released a mouse that it had been holding in its talons. The two animals regarded their respective elf bodies. Then there was a burst of crackling light, like lightning traveling between the heads of elf and animal. Bellarania's eyes opened, and she sat up and touched the mouse's head, who scampered off into the undergrowth. Luthnoel touched the hawk. It looked around, alarmed to be on the ground, surrounded by the tall creatures that a moment ago it was observing while perched on a branch above, and then flew off. Mother and daughter recounted what they had found during their dwelling. Luthnoel described the structure of the fortress she had seen from her bird's-eye view. The keep itself was built with its east wall on the bluff face, with a curtain wall extending from either side. The wall encircled the keep and an open area filled with temporary sleeping quarters for soldiers and servants. These appeared to be largely empty during the day. There was a road leading through the wall's front gate and ended at the keep, where large doors stood guarded by two elves. Archers were stationed above on towers that rose from each corner of the keep. The wall itself was unfinished, much of it still in ruins towards the back of the fortress. On the south side of the keep was a small door that led to the kitchen, where, along with the chimney, was a drainage hole at the base of the wall. That was where Luthnoel dropped off her daughter. Bellarania, the mouse, had entered the kitchen unnoticed, then exited to see a single guard standing by the servants' door, which was locked by a simple crossbar. She made her way through the keep, doing her best to avoid being underfoot of the elves walking through the corridors. Spiral stairs in the towers led to the floors where sleeping quarters were, but it wasn't until the top floor that she saw a room that was being guarded. It was well sealed. There was no way to get in, even for a mouse. She felt sure that had to be where Eltherea was being imprisoned. Bellarania then made her way out of the keep, narrowly escaping a cook brandishing a knife, where her little hawk-eyed mother was waiting to bring her back. Given this information, the group started formulating a plan. "Idiots," Ellie said aloud to herself in English as the servant and guard left her room. There on the plate were the bread, cheese, and grapes that she had requested. She picked up a grape, carefully chewing it, and then went over to the tiny slit of a window where she proceeded to spit out the seed. She closed her eyes and felt it find purchase on the small ledge of earth before the drop-off of the cliff. She felt the moisture and nutrients of the surrounding soil and drew it in through the seed coat, directing it to the embryo inside. There, on an even smaller scale, the cells, her cells, began dividing. She quickened the process, and soon she was reaching downward, her one root becoming many, drinking in more and more nourishment as they burrowed. With her roots now firmly in the ground, she began to stand, the sun warming and energizing her as sprouting buds became leaves on her limbs. She was becoming taller and thicker, her arms and fingers splitting, growing in number as the tendrils grabbed fast to the wall's rough exterior, moving ever upward. Finally, they reached the window. Her work done for now, she fully returned to her elf body, leaving the vines to rest there until the time was right. The group sat in a circle on the forest floor, dappled in light and shadow from the sun filtering through the canopy overhead. On the ground before them was a model of the fortress made of twigs and bark. Malongar had found 7 stones to represent each of them, and Clarion quickly took the largest one, saying, "This one is me." It was decided that Luthnoel would approach the main door, drawing attention to the front of the keep. Bellarani and Malangar would sneak into the empty wooden huts nearby, volleying arrows at the guards in the towers above to provide a further distraction. This would allow Calarian and Aritha to break into the door on the side, as the occupants of the fortress focused on the attack. Remember, aim to injure, not to kill. We shall not be the first to take a life in this conflict, Malangar said. Raneth killed Levi, Paul added quietly. His comment was either unheard or ignored. Why must I give up my bow? I am the village archery teacher, am I not? Calarian asked irritably. Yes, and it was I who taught you, answered Malangar. Your size and strength will serve us better within the walls of the keep. It is uncertain if I can even break through that door. It is the best chance we have of entering. You shall find the strength if the 6 will it. And if they don't, what then? Richard suddenly stood, and the group looked up at him, surprised at the interruption. My apologies, he answered their stares sheepishly. Nature calls. He left the circle and walked a short distance, hearing the conversation resume behind him. Standing behind a tree, he removed his cloak and began relieving himself, pondering how crazy this all was. I feel so alive, he thought. Wait, what's happening? Something had wrapped around him, something that for a brief moment felt warm and fuzzy, almost comforting, until it started squeezing. He managed to scream, Help! Before losing consciousness. Bellarani was the first to reach him. Her hand reached out to the creature's head, putting it immediately to sleep. It fell to the ground as they pulled Richard away, who came to, finding himself being held up by Paul and Calarian. Hey, man, are you all right? Asked Paul, speaking English. Yeah, just a little dizzy. Then, feeling a breeze, said, It's okay, you can let me go. I'd like to pull up my pants now. The group turned their attention to the squeezer that lies sleeping on the ground. Has anyone here dwelled in one of those before? Asked Malangar. I have, Aritha answered. It was many years ago, when I was a child. I wanted to explore a cavern that had narrow passages. Their movement is tricky, but I think I can remember. Perhaps, Malangar said, turning to Calarian. There will be no need for you to try and break that door after all. Luthnuel rode her horse Primrose under the open gateway of the wall, thankful that the portcullis that would have made this approach impossible had yet to be rebuilt. She heard the sounds of the guards shouting to one another when they spotted her, but continued on fearlessly. When all attention had been drawn to her, Bellarania and Malangar scaled a weak spot on the wall's north side. They ran from hut to hut until they each reached one closest to the keep and hid themselves inside, Bellarania somehow escaping detection even as she had passed the open area of the road. In defiance of the arrows drawn in her direction from guards on the battlements above, and the 2 elves on either side of the large doors brandishing their swords, Luthnuel sat stoically on Primrose and shouted, I demand to see my daughter Eltherea. Where is your false king? Go, tell him to bring her to me. Her cries were met with silence from those in the keep. Raneth, you will hear me. Free my daughter, or... Your daughter is not here, Luthnuel. Raneth's voice was suddenly heard as he appeared on one of the towers. Turn around and go back to Chness. Do so and you will not be harmed. You are a liar, Raneth, and that is the least of your faults. Release Eltherea. I will not leave without her. You seal your own fate, then, Raneth said, nodding to the guard next to him, who released his arrow at Luthnuel. She deftly dodged it, and a second later Malangar's arrow pierced that archer's shoulder, who cried out, dropping his bow. Raneth ran back into the protection of the keep as arrows began to rain down on Luthnuel and the hut where the arrow had come from. She turned Primrose, and they fled to the nearby hut from where Malangar was shooting. She joined him inside with her own bow and arrows. As they had hoped, other guards came to join the fray, but they were all unmatched to the archery skills of the mother, father, and daughter army that assailed their gate. Richard stood looking down at Aritha's body on the ground. She's so perfect, he thought, but then they all are. He admired her face for a bit longer, then felt self-conscious and said aloud, Right, don't be creepy, Richard. Guard the body, as he scanned the trees, her knife in his hand. But from what? He knew they chose him to do this to keep him out of the way. To be a watcher over one who is dwelling is a vital and sacred task, they had told him. Sure. Have fun storming the castle, he had said as they left, the reference wasted on all of them. Even Paul thought it for the best that he stayed behind with the horses and this sleeping squeezer elf situation. He was pondering what he must be missing out on when he heard a snapping sound and spun around to see a figure there, sword in hand. Oh shit, was all he got out when the elf charged him. Richard reflexively held out the knife, feeling impotent as this elf with a giant sword rushed him. Suddenly there was a blur of motion. Sunset had come from nowhere and knocked the elf down. His helmet had flown off, but he had managed to keep hold of his sword and, getting quickly to his feet, he wielded it at the horse as she turned to come at him again. She didn't need to, though, as Richard swung a giant stick and clobbered the elf in the back of the head, knocking him out cold. Human and horse stood pondering the second elf lying unconscious on the ground, and then Richard let out a, "Woo! Hell yeah! That was awesome!" He held out his hand like he expected a high five from Sunset, then patted her neck. "Guess I should tie him up, in case he comes to." He picked up the elf's sword, turning it over in his hand. "Cool," he said. Then realizing there might be more elves patrolling the woods, thought, "Let them come." Paul and Calarian crept along the outside of the south wall as Aritha slithered along behind them. As they got closer to the end of the wall, before the edge of the cliff, it was mostly ruins, so they had to be cautious lest they be spotted by the tower guards. Stopping at a good spot that afforded them a view of the building while still keeping them concealed, they waited. "I still do not understand why I cannot enter the keep with you," Paul said. "I want to help." "There is no way to know what dangers await us in there," answered Calarian. "We cannot face them while burdened with the concern of your safety. You are charged with keeping watch. If we do not return by sundown, find the others and let them know." "But I can—" Paul's rebuttal was interrupted by the sounds of shouting coming from the front of the fortress. Calarian peeked over the top of the stone that hid them and watched the guard at the tower leave his post. "It has begun. Go now, Aritha," they said to the squeezer, and she slid over the gap in the wall next to them, disappearing into the long grass. Paul and Calarian watched as she reappeared at the wall of the keep, then disappeared again into the drainage hole of the kitchen. Some minutes passed, and the side door opened. "Farewell, Paul," Calarian said, for the first time not adding the qualifier of human. "By the grace of the Six, you shall be with Eltherea again this night." And they ran off and entered the keep. Paul watched them go through the doorway. He heard the shouts and cries of those battling at the main entrance. He sat there for what seemed an eternity, fidgeting with the small knife they had allowed him to carry. "Screw this," he said, and ran towards the door.